Hello everybody, my name is Brenda Boardman and today I'm going to talk about the practical aspects of decarbonising the energy poor, and I hope these will be relevant in most countries. The objectives that I've set for this approach is very definitely one that I hope we will all agree with, which is phasing out fossil fuels. And in order to do that, have a fabric first approach to any interventions, so as to get the property to a high energy efficiency standard, which is very important for climate change. So we need to set a very clear, tight timetable. This is not going to be a quick process. We have to speed it up if we can. I'm looking at the building owner rather than the occupant, being responsible for energy efficiency. It's the building owner that's got the equity in the property, and this avoids any discussion about split incentives. We can't wait for the building to be empty. We have to start now, which means that whatever we do will have to be mandatory even when the building is occupied. Now, dealing with the fabric first, this is a sensible approach. It's not without its problems, but if you minimize the cost and the size, therefore, of installing a new heating system, you've maximized the efficiency with which it's being used, and importantly for the energy poor, you've minimized the running costs. We also have to be aware that we are part of an energy system and there's going to be a lot of demand for electricity. So if there is a switch towards more electric heating in homes, we have to keep that as low as possible because a lot of the electricity will be needed, for instance, for transport. Another of the issues with Fabric First is that in many cases, the energy performance recommendations are based on a cost effectiveness. I'm relating all of this to the energy performance certificates that we have in the UK, the A to G rating that I think most of us are familiar with. The cost effectiveness, therefore, is a mixture of the fabric and the heating system, what improvements you can make to the fabric and when you should change or improve the heating system. So if we take a fabric first approach, that makes it more expensive. So who's to pay the extra cost? Are we going to require the landlord, the property owner, to pay the extra cost in order to eventually have a saving on the heating system? That would be a reasonable trade-off, but it is one that's a trade-off over time. It is, I think most of us probably understand and know that the least energy efficient properties are those that are going to be the most expensive to get to a mandatory minimum standard. This is taken from a recent consultation from the UK government, and the aim there was to get to an EPC band C, and these are the costs depending on where the property started. So if you're already at a D, which is the blue line, the vast majority of properties can be got nearly to a C or to a C in 95% or more cases for a cost of less than £10,000. That's about 11,000 euros. If you're slightly less energy efficient, it's an E-rated property. That's the orange curve. But the ones that I'm most concerned about are the least energy efficient, the F and G properties, the grey line. So even if you spend 11,000 euros, you only get a third of the properties up to a C rating. If you go up to £15,000, 16, 17,000 euros, you can get to 2/3. But to get to over 90%, you're talking about a very substantial amount of money. So the worst, the least energy efficient properties are going to be the most expensive. So if you put in a monetary cap, as the UK government is thinking, you will disadvantage the energy poor. Now, in order to make these improvements, we need to be able to talk to the building owner. It's not too difficult with owner-occupiers who live there. We know where they are. Social landlords, those that are properties that are owned by either the local authority, the local government, or by a housing association. Again, they're large blocks of properties owned by a single institution. And by and large, they're well motivated and easy to track down. The really difficult group, and certainly in the UK, are the private landlords. This is about 30% of the households in the UK, and they're disproportionately the sector for the energy poor. In order to be able to get them to get to a minimum standard, we need a register to know who they are. There is no register at the moment. The landlords are an existing mix of amateurs, people who've just inherited a property and rented out and just got the one property, right up to professionals who own several hundreds of properties. There's also a very big range in the type of people that they're renting to. So there's both a very low income sector and a very high income sector, the sort of properties that an MP, a member of parliament, might rent during the week whilst attending parliament, but their constituency is somewhere else in the country. So by no means all of them are poor quality and low income. It's a very different, very split distribution. Now, with landlords, we cannot rely on them wanting to self-identify, especially the worst ones. They're fairly anti-regulation. They don't want to have the local authority or government intervening. So they're not going to be easy to find. We really do not know in the UK how we're going to find all the private landlords. Unfortunately, it's probably a truism that the worst properties are owned by the worst landlords. So the ones we most want to reach are going to be those that are, we can't even identify them, let alone work with them to improve the property. So we need to have some way of incentivizing participation. What I'm suggesting, and this is my suggestion, it's not government proposal, is that there should be a low interest loan for landlords and perhaps also for low income building owners, but I'm not going into that here, especially for landlords, to encourage them to take action. So if they are going to improve their property by one band on the energy performance certificate, so from a D to a C, the interest rate would be 2%. This is in line with the very best and least expensive mortgage. If they jump 2 bands, for instance, from an E to a C, the interest rate would only be 1%. And if they jump 3 bands from an F or G to a C, it would be a 0 interest loan. It's still a loan, it's not a grant, it has got to be repaid, but there isn't interest on it. And there would be no limit on the amount of money that could be lent to them. The cost to the government would be in subsidising the interest rates. The extent to which the 2% band would need a subsidy, I'm not sure, because the government can borrow very cheap money at the moment. This whole philosophy is based on the experience of the very successful German KfW scheme. One of the added benefits of having a low interest loan that's attached to some government supported institution is it enables the government to track activity. And it's not going to be easy to know who has done what. So having some inside ability to see where the money's going and who's doing what with it would be useful. Coming to the role of governments, central government's got a huge amount to do, but one of the most important things that it has to do is a very big publicity campaign very soon, right from the beginning, to make sure that everybody in the country knows that the the properties, the households, the homes have got to be up to a mandatory minimum standard of C within a fairly rapid timescale. 2030, 2035 are the 2 years that are being discussed in the UK at the moment. And for considering how many properties we've got, that's quite tight. But it must be that everybody in the population knows that mandatory minimum standards are going to be required, and this applies to landlords, property owners generally, and of course to tenants as well. For the local government, I think their role is both to monitor and enforce. I think they've got a huge amount of responsibility. They should have a database of all of the properties and their owners, starting with landlords, private landlords. This isn't a trivial activity, and there is a debate about whether they should be able to charge, for instance, £30 or €30 or something similar to that, to put people onto the database. There's a very little debate, but I think there should be more debate about whether there should be an annual or 5-yearly fee. The local government must confirm when the work has been done, when the property is very definitely up to the C standard. This might require a visit. With all of these local government activities, they need to have the funds provided by central government. And at the moment, again in the UK, we're not discussing that. But visits are an expensive part of any activity, but I think they are crucial. Sometimes at the beginning of the process, to make sure that it's known how bad it is and that work is needed, and certainly to revisit when the work has been done and prove that it's been done to the right standard. But what happens if the work has been done to a poor standard? And sometimes that's linked to an inaccurate energy performance certificate that says the work has been done, but it hasn't. There are the opportunities for the building owner to be fined for non-attainment. And there are also opportunities for somebody, perhaps the building owner, to provide a refund to the tenant when the standard hasn't been met or not been met in the right timescale. I just want to identify finally a few of the special problems. If a property is improved to a higher standard of energy efficiency, how do we prevent rent rises? We know that with many of the energy poor, they're not warm enough at the moment. So if it was more energy efficient, they would like to be warmer rather than actually saving on their fuel bills. So there isn't a saving for them. So if there was a rent rise, they would be definitely be worse off. But the whole issue of rent registrations and rent increases is difficult, but it might be somewhat easier if the landlord has had a government loan, the low interest loan. To what extent should the tenant give permission for the work, the specific work, to be done? It's important that the tenant's views and perspective is included, but there is also the opportunity for the landlord to lean on the tenant and saying, you don't want it done, do you? To make sure that there is an excuse for not going ahead and spending the money. So the tenant's permission is quite a difficult one, and points again to the role of the local authority and somebody, perhaps a local energy agency or charitable group, working with the tenant to make sure that the solutions are best for the tenant, not just for the landlord. Flats have a whole set of their own problems. If you are the individual owner of an individual flat, you may find it difficult to get the work done, to get it up to a C standard through the fabric, because it requires the permission and agreement of the adjacent flats, if not the whole of the block. And what do you do if you can't get that permission? Should you be allowed to just put in a new heating system because it's so difficult to get permission from the other property owners around you. Ventilation doesn't seem to come in very easily, certainly not in the UK. It isn't part of Fabric First and it isn't part of the heating system, but it is a crucial part of maintaining the good health inside the property. So where ventilation fits in, and again, it can be quite expensive to put in, but in terms of reducing mold, reducing ill health from mold, and generally improving the quality of the property's internal atmosphere is important. In the UK, the Energy Performance Certificate includes all of the energy used in heating, in hot water, and in fixed lighting. It does not include the electricity use, and it's almost exclusively electricity, it's a tiny bit of gas. The electricity used in appliances like washing machines, televisions, computers, fridges. We mustn't forget this. It's up to 50% of the bills for many of the energy poor, but it isn't included in the Energy Performance Certificate. Now, electricity use may be decarbonised. Electricity may be decarbonised in your country. We're working towards that, but it's still, we don't want to use electricity inefficiently in appliances because, as I said earlier, we need the electricity, for instance, for transport. If we regulate the private landlords, will they sell up? I think quite a lot of those that are amateur landlords, in other words, they have a portfolio of less than 10 properties. If so, who will buy? Will the property be lost to the private rented sector? Should the local authority or the housing association be funded by the government to buy up these properties and improve them so they're still available for rent? And most importantly of all, how can we start effective action now? And I mean now, I mean in 2021. For climate change purposes, we've got to get this ball rolling. We've got to get action happening. It's going to take quite some time for us to work through all of the properties in our respective countries. There's going to be a lot of problems with a whole range of issues, some of which I've tackled. But it's not easy how to start now. So on that rather dismal note, thank you.